astăzi, la interviurile de News Live, avem un oaspete cu totul și cu totul special. Este vorba despre domnul Patrick Basham de la Democratic Institute din Statele Unite. Domnia sa este bine cunoscut presei din țara noastră, fiindcă atât ca președinte de ONG, cât și ca colaborator principal al ziarelor mari din Statele Unite, New York Times, Washington Post și nu numai, a avut curajul, în epoca războiului româno-român, să scrie articole critice despre așa numita luptă împotriva corupției din țara noastră. Chestiuni curajoase, chestiuni care au făcut istorie. Domnul Patrick Basham a fost intens atacat de ceea ce maestru Ion Cristoi ar numi divizia presă din țara noastră, deci de presa sistemului. Astăzi, stimați telespectatori, îl avem pe domnul Patrick Basham la interviurile DC News Live. Good morning, Mr. President. Welcome to DC News, to DC News, to our newspaper.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. So right now you're back in Bucharest.
I am back in Bucharest.
What is the purpose of your visit right now?
Well, this visit, like my previous visits, I continue to keep what we call a watching brief on political developments in Romania. It's now been an area of considerable interest for me for several years, and I'm looking both at the respective political legal cases in terms of the progress or evolution or regression, however one wishes to characterize it, of the anti-corruption campaign. But also, I think, both in terms of my work and others who've looked from the outside of what's happening here, I'm starting to pay a little more attention to the business side of it, as in how the business sector, corporations have been, conglomerates have been affected as well, because most of my focus and others as interest and attention has rightly increased on how individuals have been prosecuted, and I would argue in some cases persecuted, under the anti-corruption campaign. I think also it's important to recognize that, as far as I can determine from the outside, the Romanian state has also taken an active interest in respective business enterprises as part of that campaign. And we in the West, and particularly in America, where the Democracy Institute is based, we're increasingly aware of the whole issue of what we call crony capitalism, where there's this unhealthy relationship between the government and some elements of the private sector. And so I'm interested in looking and learning more about to what extent crony capitalism exists in Romania. Is it thriving? Is it insignificant? My understanding so far from my research and the people I've spoken to is that it is actually a considerable problem. And so these are the elements of what is happening in real time here that I want to explore further to better explain to the people around the world who fortunately are more interested in Romania than they were, just exactly what is going on.
So your NGO is keeping an eye on what's going on in Romania.
Yes.
Your reports are going public or are going to the persons who are sponsoring those activities you have here, or you print articles in major newspapers in the United States and all over the world?
I think the short answer is yes to all of the above.
All of it.
But just to flesh that out a little bit for your viewers, I do write in the press about these issues. I'm asked to comment on TV and radio like we are today here. But also I'm asked by those organizations outside of Romania, some inside of the country, to give my views, whether in a briefing or in print, to do research. It's a combination of things, and I'm invited, because of the attention that my work on Romania has received in the last few years, I'm often invited to speak at events or conferences. As I say, there is, I think, belatedly, but fortunately, a growing international recognition. First of all, simply that the anti-corruption campaign was an important thing, and that it was a major development here, but a growing awareness, which I think is overdue, that there are two sides to the nature of this specific campaign.
Yes.
And that outside of Romania, there needs to be a greater appreciation, which I try to do in these through these various instruments, that we shouldn't just assume that because there's a declaration that we are against something, that naturally everything we're doing is good, everything we're doing is well-intentioned, and there are no negative consequences either to the country or to individuals or to businesses.
The United States was in the first line by supporting the anti-corruption campaign, which is something very good, actually. I mean, Romania has a growing importance for the security of the United States in the region, and it was normal that the United States would care a lot about the anti-corruption in Romania. The problem was that at a certain moment, the anti-corruption campaign went into a political fight, basically. And I never heard, unfortunately, the American officials to say something, we support the anti-corruption campaign, but we don't agree with the abuses which were made in Romania. Those things like putting people in jail for 6 months without being judged, and then at the end of the day they were dismissed of everything, and they were considered not guilty. Why do you think it happened so? Because you show some signals in the media in all these years, from 2014, 2015, you keep writing, you keep talking, you have conferences. Some other people had stronger voices than you had?
Yes. Well, first of all, you touch on really exactly why at our institute this is a natural issue for us, even though you may think, well, it's Romania, that's a long way away. And that is that we study democracy, but we especially focus on how democratic politics, sounds like an obvious thing, but becomes politicized. And so good intentions often veer off on another path for a variety of reasons. It's the nature of politics, but it doesn't mean it should be ignored and shouldn't be communicated. So that's what puts our spotlight on Romania and the anti-corruption campaign. But you raise an extremely important point, I think one of the most important, and that is that as far as I can tell to this point, the momentum behind the campaign, despite the increasing awareness that there are a number of downsides and it has veered off in various ways, whatever the original intent, a lot of that momentum is maintained because of external actors, external pressure or support, depending on how you wish to look at it. I think a lot of that is, as far as there is a discussion about that, a lot of the focus naturally is on Brussels and the EU, and we could talk for hours about why that is and the detail of it. But the other actor, I would argue, is even more important in terms of the large picture. I think Brussels is more important day to day, but long-term big picture, it's more about America. And I think that the role, for example, of the respective American ambassadors in Bucharest is, you could argue on any given day, perhaps the American ambassador is the most important person in Bucharest.
It is the most important person in Romania.
Yeah, and as someone who is very much in favor of strong defense and security and counter-terrorism relations between America and its allies, including Romania, I completely understand and support the need and the desire for a very strong bilateral relationship on a number of these issues. Yet, the devil is in the details.
Yes.
And you raise the really important nuance here, which is that America correctly wants Romania to be as rid of corruption as possible for all
Yes.
kinds of reasons, self-interested and selfless reasons. However, what America has done, first under President Obama and continuing under President Trump, despite how different their administrations are, is they appear to have given originally and continue to renew a blank check to the Romanian state to conduct the anti-corruption campaign however they see fit. And whenever the respective ambassadors from Washington, from America, are asked about the campaign, they always say, it's fantastic, it's going really well, all we want is more of it, and any attempt to backslide, we don't support that. Which would be fantastic if everything was wonderful. But clearly, everything isn't wonderful. And what there's two problems. One, it doesn't, I think, truly help Romania. I think the best, whether it's in our personal lives, professional lives, or in diplomacy, your best friend supports you when you really need their help. But they tell you the truth because they're your friend. And I think it doesn't help Romania that America is not being, either out of ignorance or lack of concern, is not being candid with Romania for Romanians' sake. The other thing it does, and now this is, you might say it's slightly philosophical, but in the biggest picture, long term, it betrays some of America's values. Because if America is to be a role model in terms of liberal democracy in the truest sense, then we can't simply support campaigns or policies that sound good, that sound like they incorporate the right values, the correct values, if in their implementation and their execution there are human rights abuses, civil liberties being abused, all of that, which is so central to what America is supposed to be about. That's a very long answer to a straightforward question. But I do think that America's role is underappreciated, and it's also unnecessarily detrimental, actually, to Romania, because America is the most important supporter, probably internally or externally.
For Romania, the relationship with the United States is essential, no matter what, in security terms and not only. That's why it was, as I said, a very good idea, a generous idea to support the anti-corruption, but at the end of the day, the way they did it was not always proper. For instance, you heard, as we heard, about the protocols between the former Secret Service, the former CRI, with the High Court, the Supreme Court, as we have it you have it in the United States. That means that the judges were not under the law and God. They were under the protocol with the former CRI. It was nobody said anything from Washington, from the American officials. Is what you say, that they won the campaign no matter what, like the anti-drug campaigns in Latin America, for instance. You have to get rid of the traffickants no matter what, and no matter the methods you're actually using, as a matter of fact. How do you see things going on now in Romania? I know you have a lot of information, you wrote the articles. I must confess that we talked before. So what do you think it will happen in Romania now? Actually, a new ambassador, Adrian Zuckerman, he had his hearings in the Senate, and he speaks perfect Romanian because he was born in Romania. So it will be some change also here in the embassy. How do you see things going on right now in our country?
Well, it's such an important and terrific question to which I probably don't have a satisfactory answer. I think, in a nutshell, I think Romania is at a sort of fork in the road. the question is, because there has been, especially internally and even externally, as some of us have attempted to shed light on what's going on, there's a greater appreciation that the anti-corruption campaign isn't all as advertised, right? That there are huge downsides. So the good news is there's now some attention to that, and there's an opportunity for, if not a different path, then a strong adjustment. So does Romania adjust, learn the lessons of the last several years? I would like to be able to say I'm highly confident that's what's going to happen. Or does America, Freudian slip there, does Romania continue largely down the same path, which I believe is in a negative direction? I suspect she may veer somewhere between those two paths, but more on the path she is on. And the reason for that is in no small part for what we've already discussed. The American role, which I unfortunately don't see, American influence is good, but the influence is in the wrong direction. America isn't pushing back where she should push back. And also with the European Union. Although vis-a-vis America, there is more discussion and more awareness of how highly imperfect the corruption campaign is. In decision-making terms, I don't think we can anticipate any major change. And when you have, for example, and obviously someone like yourself is more aware of the detail than I am from the outside, but where you have someone like Mrs. Kövesi, where her position changed dramatically internally in recent times here, obviously, yet her reputation outside of Romania has perhaps been enhanced by what happened.
That's right.
Right. So
her reputation was enhanced.
Yeah. Rather than saying, "Oh, we didn't know that. There were deep problems. Ooh, thankfully someone did something." It is seen as her dismissal is seen as further indication that we need to use a sort of American phrase, double down. Romania needs to double down, and we need to double down our support from the outside to people like her who have been sort of doing the Lord's work. And so now, where she's in a position, or appears to be about to be in a position, where she is going to be taking her old Romanian role and being the European Kövesi rather than merely the Romanian one, is striking. And I think that would be the diplomatic way of putting it. And it signifies clearly that at the EU level in Brussels, they don't get it, from my perspective.
Yes.
Or they certainly don't get it enough. There aren't enough of the decision makers, the influencers, to recognize that even if one had confidence that in this would-be role in Brussels, she would be a good choice, even if that was the case, I think it sends the wrong signals, because at the very least, I think it's fair to say that you could view her the most recent part of her career in Romania as both good and bad. I think that would be, you have to look at both sides of the coin, and so for her to then be de facto promoted, to a multinational and a very important position. So again, a long-winded way of saying that for anyone who might share my views and my cynicism about the campaign, I can point to individual examples of light perhaps at the end of the tunnel, or at least along the path, but I'm not at all confident that there's going to be any really major substantive change, which I think it's a great shame. It really is a great shame.
So you believe that Romania is going to face abuses also in the following years, like we did before? Because since Mrs. Kövesi was dismissed, and now she might have a brilliant career in the EU, in the European Union. I must tell you that we understand that the DNA continue to fight against corruption, but without the press, without the televisions, without imprisoning people, without being judged, with far less abuses than they had before. So for 1 year at least, things are a little bit different.
No, absolutely. I mean, clearly there has been, one can see even from the outside, clearly there has been improvement as more and more has come to light and some changes have taken place. The question on the table, as it were, are these changes, these improvements temporary? Or is it a transition, a segue to a more permanent improvement?
For instance, the interim chief of DNA right now, Mr. Kalin Nistor, he opposed the abuses, and in the last year he made a terrific job as well, but he's continuing to be an interim chief, as it is the general prosecutor, which Mr. Licu, Bogdan Licu, was, he's in the office in the last 4 months, but President and the Minister of Justice, they failed to nominate them to be in full position so they can have full power.
You see, always, in any democracy, you can have, often you do have, a situation where there are individuals, usually at the head of an organization or agency, and they are found or believed to have committed or overseen abuses. And there's a lot of attention suddenly, and let's say they're removed or dismissed or they resign. And everyone has a huge sigh of relief, and everyone is optimistic and even confident that then everything improves. Now, that can be the case, because it can be that the problem was from the top, and then that problem sort of leaked down to everybody else. However,
the former President Traian Băsescu, yes.
You can have the problem where it's an institutional issue, and that the person at the top was sort of the figurehead or the symbol of it, and the head is removed, but in some bureaucratic cases, the body continues to live, the heart still beats, and the brain still works, and so that can be very dangerous, because if the anonymous individuals, largely anonymous anyway, are of the same mindset as their former leader, not only will carry on in the way that they were, but the spotlight has been removed, because the person who got all the attention has gone. And hopefully, I mean, I'd love to sort of share your optimism. Hopefully, the DNA and other organizations intimately part of the campaign, the improvements that we can point to continue, because the problem, it turns out, wasn't all the way through the body, as it were. It wasn't head to toe.
No,
but
yes,
that may not be the case. And I hope I'm being overly cynical. It's a occupational hazard.
No, you're not cynical. You're not cynical, and we are not so optimistic. We just saw what it happened in the last year. The problem is that the party in power, the government, the parliament, tried to change a little bit the laws which allow those abuses. Yeah. The problem is that it was such a huge internal and also external pressure that the laws have been changed in a very small part of it. They are not very efficient, and right now new laws which are in the parliament, they are blocked in the constitutional court, they are blocked by President Iohannis. So the system tried to get back in the period when they were running the country not in a democratic way, because they are not elected, they are not the parliament, they are not the government. It's just you don't like a person, you try to make a criminal file for it, you put him in jail for 1 or 2 months, all the press will be there, people will believe that that person did something wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very difficult to defend yourself in front of press. And after 4, 5, 6 years, the judges will consider that the person was not guilty, but nobody cared anymore about that. So, in your opinion, what Romania should do? That those war between Romanians and Romanians should never occur in the country anymore?
Well, I mean, on the specific issue, you talk about the legislative changes and all of that. And obviously, you know, on the outside, we all became intimately aware of the protests as a result, that tremendous coverage around the world. I think it's a good example. You know, there's an old adage: just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not out to get you. And I think, as I've been studying Romania, I think that we've had a good example with, you've had a whole lot of parliamentarians who've attempted to change the rules to protect themselves. Clearly,
Yes.
naked, crude self-interest.
Fully agree,
Absolutely.
yes.
So those internally and externally who were correctly very concerned about corruption rightly said, this is bad. Okay, which I agree with. The problem is, which does not get discussed, it isn't even appreciated, is that just because those were, you might say, pro-corruption or selfish, self-interested acts, it doesn't mean that none of those, the people who were trying to protect themselves, either weren't or couldn't be targeted unfairly themselves as part of a campaign that's become perverse or had become perverse. So it's very difficult, and I'm the first one to say I've done a very imperfect job of doing it, of trying to say to people, just because he's corrupt or she's corrupt or is acting in a way that suggests that, doesn't mean that what they have been or will be charged with is necessarily true. You know, it's, you know, you can be guilty of robbing a bank, but it doesn't mean that when you're charged with murder that you were the one who pulled the trigger. You know, the two are mutually exclusive.
That's right.
Or can be. So there, that's a sort of a nuanced way of looking at it that I think is completely removed. What I think, but getting back to your actual question, what should happen? And I appreciate a nice, easy question like that. I think
We need an idea. You don't need to implement it.
that's good. It's always helpful.
Somebody else
Yes.
has to do it.
And never have me back if it is implemented to discover what went wrong. This is going to be a very rare example or incident where I say something positive about South Africa. The one thing I would point to, one of the only things over the last number of years in South Africa that I think has been done right since South Africa became a true
Yes.
democracy, is they had the sense, and surprisingly for a brand new democracy, the political maturity to attempt, largely successfully, to draw a line across the page, a line underneath through all of the problems. They had their Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and it gave the two things that were important. Everyone got to say what they needed to say about what had happened to them, who had done wrong, who had wrong done to them, and there was a public airing. Clearly, there is and has been a systemic, endemic problem in this country with corruption
Yes.
at all levels. And some of that has been aired now. That's a good thing. Does more need to come out? Almost certainly, yes. That would be healthy, that would be cathartic. But at the same time, if I think this country is going to move on, just as for different reasons South Africa needed to move on, you need to recognize that if we're going to investigate and prosecute and punish everyone in Romania who's been involved in corruption, I would suggest to your viewers that you're going to need to build a lot more prisons, right? So you have to, I think, say, this has not been a small problem. We all know it's been a large problem. We still know it's a problem. We need to get it out in the open and be willing to move on. Now that doesn't sound very satisfying if you are, protesting for justice and you have an individual case where you have been directly affected. But as a society, as a political system, as a country, I think Romania, like others, needs to get beyond this at some point. Because if you do what I'm suggesting, I think you eliminate all of the political, the politicizing of this, because you take away the instruments, the toys and the tools that politicians and others can use to simply as an excuse to go after their enemies, their competitors, the people they don't like in the media, blah, blah, blah. And if you put a line through it, you actually then have to focus on other things, the things that ordinary people are really concerned about.
This is going to be very difficult in Romania because we just had a referendum on the 26th of May, as you were aware of it. And forgiveness was denied by the Romanian people. So it's a full stop here. So what we can continue is that different American administrations supported the anti-corruption campaign, no matter the abuses which were made. Maybe, and through you as well, you can convince those administrations to come with suggestions of laws in the parliament which can stop corruption, because corruption in European countries, more like in the United States, occurs when you have those tenders, those auctions in the public sector, no matter if we are talking about weapons or roads or hospitals. And the tender laws, the auction laws are difficult, are very big. You don't know what's good and what's wrong. So maybe if you have suggestions about that, that might help also Romania.
And I think what you're touching on is interwoven with what I touched on earlier regarding crony capitalism, as we put it, because I would argue. I mean, I put my cards on the table. I'm a free market, pro-capitalism person, pro-trade, all the rest of it. But what that means is that you need a level playing field. The government cannot play favorites. No matter how you can have the most pro-business government in the world, but it doesn't mean they're pro-competition or pro the marketplace. Because the marketplace doesn't tell you who should or shouldn't win. It lets everyone compete. But the larger a government's involvement in a society, particularly in its economy, and obviously with Romanian history, you're coming from a place where the government was, to overstate it, but the government was everything. Nothing happened without, bureaucratic say-so, and therefore a lot of things simply didn't happen. As long as the government has a serious stake, it is in a business's self-interest to attempt to influence those decisions, and that inherently and understandably leads to corruption, because you are going to do whatever you need to do, say who you pay who you need to pay to make your business work, not because you want to, but because you need to, because that's the environment you're in. So the solution, and again, I seem to be very good at giving you solutions that you would probably say almost impossible to implement, even if they make sense. It's an argument for two things. One, a focus, and I know the recent figures I was just looking at in the last couple of days are very positive, but the focus on economic growth and development that's widely shared in Romania. The more prosperous people are, the less need they have to make, either on a personal level or a professional level, individual decisions which are quote unquote corrupt, right? Secondly, you need a government that, from my point of view, knows its place, knows that it's about rule of law and security and the courts and all of that, and doesn't believe its role is to decide who prospers, who doesn't, or what the country needs. It lets the marketplace determine that. but creates an environment through trade and taxation and regulation that allows. There's absolutely no reason. Romania is more prosperous than she was. There's no reason Romania cannot continue on a very upward trajectory. But if it doesn't, it's probably because government's going to get in the way. So the less opportunity to act corruptly, the less need for individuals and for businesses to engage in these kind of relationships, for example, with government decision makers, the better off it will be. Now, see, that isn't sexy and it's not glamorous and it isn't, I'm not saying you're asking for this, but it's not a single piece of legislation that is brought from Washington by the ambassador. He puts it down on the table in Bucharest and it's passed, and there we go, we've ended corruption in Romania. It's a slow process. It's a process that's going to happen, not in the shadows, where a lot of the decisions have been made to this point, but it's going to happen sort of below the radar.
No, but the American government works with many NGOs, which, like yours, for instance, for enhancing democracy,
Yes.
for supporting laws, which goes to the Congress, and the Congress is the one which is voting for it.
Yeah. And
So those NGOs coming from Washington and having the stamp of the State Department,
yes.
I'm sure they will be very welcomed in Romania.
No, there is absolutely nothing wrong, and there's lots of things right about experts and groups with expertise in North America or Western Europe providing assistance, you might say sort of civic education, and where applicable, specific examples of legislative tools that can be used, that can be helpful. And I think that's all worthwhile. The problem is, I think it's necessary but insufficient, right? And one of the faults of much of what Western nations have done, I would use an example of the Middle East without trying to go off too much on a tangent, is that there's been a focus on, you might say, the optics of democracy, obviously elections and all of that, and less attention, because I think there's less appreciation of the fundamental characteristics that are required for a liberal democracy to function and be sustained. And those characteristics are required for a democracy, a comparatively new democracy like Romania, to function, to sustain certain values, and as a consequence to rid itself of corruption which has been inherent and endemic. You know, it's not, I'm not suggesting you're suggesting this, but unfortunately, this is not a we do this and that happens. You know, whether we're in the West or in Romania, it's a problem which is, I think, become a cultural problem.
You know, it's also corruption, unfortunately, became a brand of Romania.
Yes.
Which is not fair, because I don't think that corruption in Romania is higher than in mostly of the European countries, probably with the exception of the northern countries, Northern Europe countries. Otherwise, here in the middle and the south, corruption is about the same level. And lately we saw huge corruption in Germany, in Holland, in France we see it many times. Italy and Greece, they are very close with us. So this brand is going to hurt Romania, in my opinion, on the medium term. And from this point of view, because what do you think the American companies will do with a country like Romania, which made in corruption a brand? And I know the interest of different American administrations.
I mean, this is where one has
to promote American companies.
This is where one has to have great sympathy.
Yes.
For the Romanian government and Romanian interests in general, because that is the brand. But as you say, Romania does not have a monopoly on corruption, far from it. And I think, you know, if there was a representative of the State Department here or the American Embassy, they would say that in order for America and Romania to continue to have good relations, and for us to be able to encourage and persuade with a straight face American businesses investing here, They need to know, we need to be able to show them that Romania is serious about this problem. And that's why we support it the way we do. And that's all great. The problem is, of course, that they're glossing over it. So do you say, does one focus on the problems with the campaign? Because that's the paramount thing we're worried about. Or do we say, yes, what's being told to American businesses is inaccurate, but what's really important is that they invest, right?
Fully.
This, and these questions aren't being asked, or this isn't a debate that's going on, at least not publicly, right? And it's very hard to get the people who are in the room to talk about this talk about this kind of thing. But these are the dilemmas. I don't have the great answer to them. But where do how do you weight these questions?
For instance, I'm sure you meet a lot of American companies in Washington asking you, because you're an expert in Romania, we want to invest there. Do you think we should go there? Because I see all these reports in the press talking about corruption. Everybody has been jailed in this country. Even the president of the party in power was taken from his chair and put it in jail on the 27th of May, Mr. Liviu Dragnea. So why we should go over there? Because we shall face corruption since the plane will land in Bucharest. What are you telling them about that?
Well,
which is not actually true. I mean, I would say. Well,
several years ago, there's no question that American and other Western companies either chose not to come, or they were here and they chose to leave because they just couldn't deal, as it were. They didn't want to continue to deal with the issue, which affecting them in a very tangible way, which is a vivid demonstration of the fact of how real the problem was or is. And if I was advising them 10 years ago, I would be inclined to say, well, it's hard to argue with that, because that's what you are dealing with. I have a slightly different piece of advice today. What I say today is, there remains a problem, and whether you accept my analysis or not, that the campaign is not all it's advertised to be, Romania is, if you forget all about, but you put to one side the politics and you look at the fundamentals economically of this country, there's both tremendous potential and you can point to specific areas of improvement. There are the better policies and worse policies, and nothing is static for very long. It's a dynamic situation. But I think if you look at a sort of a trend line, both the inputs and outputs economically in Romania, the trend line is positive, it's upward. That can and should, and we all have to hope and pray, continues. But it won't continue if company X, Y, and Z don't come. The best way of an American company ensuring that Romania isn't the corrupt country they may think it is to come here anyway. Because the economic benefit to Romania is, further to what I was arguing earlier, is, I think, long term, how we make some of the greatest progress. Often in life and in politics, you can do all kinds of things at the legal level, at the political level, at the legislative level, but it's actually the economics of a country and how people conduct their daily lives and daily businesses that determines really how life is truly lived. And whether, for example, people live in a corrupt situation where they are out of necessity forced to act corruptly. So I, like the State Department, argue for more American investment. I think it's a win-win for Romania, clearly, and I think it's actually a win for the companies. So I totally understand why the embassy and the State Department are focused on that. I just think that they are missing a big part of the story, which will come, which will come back long term to haunt them and most importantly haunt Romanians. But yes, Americans should be here economically. This is a country that can do great things for itself and in terms of bilateral relationships economically.
I fully agree. We are going to have presidential elections this year in November. These are the most important elections we have in Romania because the president has a lot of power in this country. Is the United States supporting any specific candidate at your knowledge? You're not an American official, you are civil society, but still maybe you heard something in Washington.
Well, to state the obvious, the world changed 2.5 years ago with President Trump's election, right?
Fully.
And so, although perhaps not on America's position on corruption in the campaign here in Romania, the one thing I would like it to have changed on is perhaps the only thing it didn't change on. But that's a discussion for another day. As you are well aware, and I'm sure your viewers are aware, the Romanian president, the incumbent, and President Trump, by every account that I have read, heard, or been told to me, have a good relationship. It's a positive relationship.
Yes.
In part because the Romanian president is seen as not just a cheerleader, but a power behind what is happening, which the American president views as very positive, as we've already.
So what you say is that President Klaus Iohannis is very well seen by President Donald Trump.
Yes, President Trump sees President Iohannis as, I don't want to say a kindred spirit, but someone who, on corruption, on security, on terrorism, defense, as someone who, from Trump's point of view, gets it. And President Trump, as you know, hasn't won new friends across Europe at the leadership level, outside perhaps of some Central and Eastern European countries. And so, he is keen, he enthusiastically, literally and figuratively, puts his arms around President Iohannis in that regard. So my understanding is that the Trump administration would not be disappointed if the incumbent Romanian administration was, was continue. However, what the options will be, whether they're set in stone for Romanians, and then of course the Trump people will make their evaluation. I think they're looking for more of the same. I think they recognize that, and I think the new ambassador recognizes that as far as the Americans are concerned, or Trump's Washington is concerned, they probably couldn't do much better, given in the real world, the last thing that they want is a socialist president or someone who is going to want to make a point or make a legacy for themselves by standing up to America.
A socialist government brought Romania into NATO.
Yes.
In 2002 and then 2004. So a socialist president.
Well, this is the thing. I mean,
it will be very much open to the United States as well.
But yes, what I'm giving you is I think what their take would be on it. I mean, if you as you are doing, if you step back and sort of look at the history a little more broadly, you see, and I think this is a trend certainly across Europe and North America, where until fairly recently, it's not that left and right always agreed on foreign policy or defense policy, but most Democrats in America, most of the Labour, if they were in power in the United Kingdom, or socialists in France, other countries in Europe, they were pretty strong. I mean, at the time of the Soviet Union, Cold War, we have to stand up to them, and post-Soviet Russia, a sense that we're kind of maybe not on the same page on defense policy, but we're not that many pages apart in the book. We're closer to the same, we're on the same chapter, in the same chapter. That's changing. Whether you have Jeremy Corbyn leading the Labour Party in the UK, if he became Prime Minister, I mean, he is proudly anti-American, right? And his view of relationships, security relationships,
unfortunately,
right, across Europe, you have new left-wing leaders and energy that sees this very differently. In the United States, Democrats, leading Democrats, the next Democratic candidate for president, perhaps, see these relationships very differently than their predecessors, the recent predecessors. So I could be wrong about this. You're far more informed than I am, but I would have some concern, I think the Trump people would have a lot of concern, that because this isn't 2000 or 2004, a 2019 left-wing Romanian president might be part of what they would view as an unfortunate movement among left-wing leaders.
Your position should be definitely listened by the PSD leaders right now. It's very important. Maybe they should go to Washington and try to talk with the American officials and giving them the idea that Romanian is not anti-American, no matter what party will be in power and will be in Cotroceni.
I think that's, I mean, in the now many trips I've had here in recent years, I've found, not just in terms of professional discussion, but just in personal discussion, I've been somewhat, not surprised, but I suppose pleasantly made aware of how individual Romanians have a sort of, their default position is sort of quite positive or warm towards the United States. And I don't think in America it's appreciated that your history vis-a-vis obviously Russia, Soviet Union, not just that history, but that history, for example, the influence it has on, as I see it, a lot of Romanians' views of the United States, if that makes any sense, and the role that America has played historically, given your sensitive location.
We were
right?
not happy to be left in the Soviet Union hands after the World War II.
So,
definitely, we're not happy with that.
You know, so you have an experience and a history that, you know, many others cannot imagine, and therefore, sadly or regrettably, they don't quite appreciate then why attitudinally many Romanians are actually in a better place from our perspective than they might otherwise be.
Mr. Patrick Basham, thank you so much for the interview. We wait now. We started. We wait for you. Anytime you come to Bucharest to give us your point of view in DC News Live. Stimați telespectatori, vă mulțumim foarte mult. Cred că este un interviu care prezintă mult din subteranele politicii americane de la Washington și eu sper că ne ajută să înțelegem măcar cu un bit mai bine, cu un pixel mai bine, politica Statelor Unite față de România. Vă mulțumim că ne-ați urmărit. Thank you so much again, sir.
Thank you, my pleasure.